Hello, and welcome to the Out and Equal 2017 Town Call Series. This is Isabel Porras, Associate Director of Out and Equal University. Today we'll be discussing millennial engagement in LGBT employee resource groups. This is a 1-hour broadcast audio call. Please make sure you've turned on the speakers or headphones and you've turned your volume up. If you have any trouble listening in, please chat in so we can share a phone number for you to use. If you have any questions or comments during the call, please use the chat box to share those. We will be recording this session, and it, along with the slide deck, will be available after the call. Before we begin, a few announcements. Our next town call will be on September 26th. This is our annual Workplace Summit, Know Before You Go, and we highly encourage you to register. Our next town call will be held on November 16th and will feature a case study on developing regional strategies for a global LGBT employee network. Look for detailed information soon. The global webinar series continues on September 13th with a focus on Colombia, while the November 8th webinar explores LGBT workplace equality in Singapore. And of course, the 2017 Workplace Summit will be held October 9th through 12th in Philadelphia. October 9th is our pre-conference leadership day and features seminars on key LGBT workplace issues. It's a really great opportunity to either enhance your summit experience or, for those of you who can't attend the 3-day summit, to experience some of the best that Out and Equal and our corporate and federal partners have to offer. For more information about Leadership Day and Summit, including the detailed schedule, please visit outandequal.org. Thank you for joining us for today's topic, Fostering Millennial Engagement in LGBT ERGs. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Ben Demers. Ben joined Out and Equal as an intern and is a graduate of McGill University, where he studied geography and cultural studies. For the next few minutes, Ben is going to set the stage for our panel discussion by discussing millennial workplace trends as they relate to LGBT equality. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, Isabel. Thank you. So as Isabel said, I'm going to be giving a short presentation to provide some background information on LGBT millennial trends in the workplace. And when I say LGBT millennial trends, I mean both trends amongst LGBT millennials as well as general millennial views on LGBT issues, both of which are important to our discussion today. So just to go over the agenda, I'll start by discussing general workplace trends amongst millennials, including what they look for from their employers, and then I'll home in specifically on millennials and LGBT issues. From here, I'll discuss why millennial opinions on LGBT issues should matter to their employers, as well as the positive impacts of promoting a diverse and inclusive workspace. Finally, I'll consider what factors companies must consider to effectively foster millennial involvement in D&I initiatives before we move into the featured panel. So a few quick disclaimers before I get into things. First, millennials hate being called millennials. So I apologize for the 3,000 times I've already used it during this call. This is largely because Gen Xers and baby boomers characteristically use the term with disdain, so it's just important to keep this in mind whenever attempting to address groups of millennials in your own initiatives. And second, it's always important to remember the significant variation within the millennial generation. This generation covers people born throughout a 17-year time span, as well as people who come from a variety of different backgrounds, and so an awareness of this is also just something you should always keep in mind when creating your own initiatives. So before we really get into the meat of the presentation, I want to do a quick survey. So which generation do you identify with? So we can just kind of get an idea of the different generations on the call. I have some people answering in, so let's take a look at those results. So it seems like Generation X is dominating the call, making up about 15%. And the next largest is millennials at 32.5, so that's pretty cool. Great. So getting into the presentation, for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to be defining millennials as those born between 1981 and 1997. These are disputed boundaries, and you can find definitions that start as early as the late 1970s and then end as late as 2000. At the global level, while millennials make up approximately 25% of the total population, they make up a larger proportion of the global workplace, and some estimates even put that proportion at upwards of 50% by 2020. So that obviously makes this group and its desires monumentally important for companies' futures. In the United States, as shown here on this slide, this group makes up approximately 24% of the population, more than any other group. and it constitutes the largest percentage of the U.S. workforce as well at 34%. Additionally, in the U.S., as in many other countries, millennials are also the workforce's most diverse generation, and that's something to always keep in mind. 43% of millennial U.S. adults are non-white, which is higher than any previous generation, and this trend is only expected to continue to rise as Gen Zers also come into the workforce. So companies must be increasingly prepared to embrace this diversity. Millennials also search for particular traits in the companies they work for, and these are traits that largely apply globally. They include wanting them to behave in a responsible manner and to have a positive social impact, wanting the companies they work for to provide opportunities to engage in causes they care about, and to feel that these causes matter to their employers, wanting to receive additional leadership training and opportunities from their employers, and finally, wanting to work in diverse and inclusive workplaces that take various types of difference into account, and which reflect what we just laid out as the very diverse character of the millennial generation. And in many places, this desire to work in a diverse workplace extends to the sexual orientation and gender identity of employees. Along with being the most racially and ethnically diverse generation, more millennials either identify as LGBT or as strong supporters of LGBT equality than any previous generation. According to a recent Gallup poll, in the U.S., 7.3% of millennials identify as LGBT, compared with only 3.2% of Gen Xers. And one recent survey reported by GLAAD and Harris Polls even put this value at upwards of 20%. Additionally, and equally important, I would say, 65% of U.S. millennials support comprehensive non-discrimination protection for LGBT Americans, which is higher than any previous generation. So showing that inclusion matters not only to LGBT individuals, but also to their allies. Considering why companies should care about this, there are a number of reasons why they would want to take the initiative on diversity and inclusion efforts for LGBT employees who might face issues at work, ranging from a lack of representation in senior membership to open discrimination or harassment from other coworkers. So past the desire to obviously acknowledge basic dignity for their employees, companies also must consider that diverse companies are more appealing to both LGBT and ally millennial hires, the best and brightest of whom will have their choice of jobs and are going to choose companies who share their values. Because workplace issues can also lead LGBT employees to be more likely to consider leaving their positions, diversity and inclusion efforts also help maintain high retention rates amongst LGBT millennials. And lastly, it's important to note that corporate diversity and inclusion isn't anything new. And so companies need to take the initiative on these matters in order to not be left behind from the forerunners. So when taking into account their desire to work at socially responsible companies that embrace diversity and inclusion, including on LGBT issues, and their desire for leadership opportunities, it would seem logical that millennials would look to get involved in their company's D&I initiatives. For instance, 28% of the attendees at Out and Equal's 2016 Workplace Summit were millennials. However, there are also differences between the modes of involvement of millennials and previous generations that will likely need to be taken into account for corporate management. So for starters, social media and other technological changes have totally transformed the modes of involvement for millennials, including on LGBT issues, since millennials have been exposed to a wide array of engagement strategies based around emerging technology. There's also the consideration of what has been termed a post-game mindset, which describes the many LGBT millennials who don't want to be defined socially by their sexuality. Shifts between these generations are also reflected in common terminology, the most apparent being the shift from gay and lesbian to LGBT to LGBTQ or just queer, the latter of which is still often met with significant hesitation from older segments of the community. And while subtle, the use of terminology can greatly affect millennial attitudes towards company initiatives. As well, just like other millennials, LGBT millennials also sense negative stereotypes from older generations, which might influence their willingness to get involved in company initiatives. So all of these have to be taken into account when considering how to best foster millennial engagement with your D&I initiatives. So for the purposes of our discussion today, we're going to focus primarily on one mode of D&I involvement, so employee resource groups. which LGBT employees have used successfully for years to improve their workplace experiences. However, anecdotal evidence suggests that millennials appear to be more resistant to getting involved in ERGs, which obviously seems counterintuitive given that ERGs provide the leadership opportunities and visibility that millennial employees report actively desiring. So for a little more insight on this matter, we're now going to turn things over to our panel of speakers. We can start with Kevin.
All right, thanks. So this is Kevin England. First of all, I just want to welcome all of you today to the call. I'll tell you a little bit about my background and why I'm speaking with this panel today. I actually have been involved with Out and Equal in one way or another for about a decade now. I formerly worked at Bank of America and was in a volunteer leadership role with the bank's LGBT Pride employee network, and worked with a number of folks from Out and Equal workplace advocates over the years on some training and development we did internally, attended the summit many times, and so on. More recently, as a result of the work that I did with the bank's employee network, I was able to move full-time into diversity and inclusion at the company, and upon finishing my PhD last year, left to focus on teaching and consulting in the field of employee resource groups and diversity and inclusion in general. So really excited about all things ERG and diversity and inclusion. Particularly interested in today's conversation around millennial engagement. I'm a member of the board of directors for Reaching Out MBA, a nonprofit organization that's focused on LGBT MBA students and business school students, so a lot of those students are millennials. And in the companies that I work with as part of my consulting, we do a lot of work with younger workers today and really trying to get them engaged in the employee resource groups at their organizations and D&I efforts in general. So again, very excited about this work in particular. I also wanted to take a moment to introduce our panelists and have them tell you a little bit about their background and what brings them to this conversation today. So Abigail, why don't we start with you?
Cool. Hi, everybody. My name is Abigail Braceros. Thank you for joining in on the call. So my role, I've got two jobs, basically. I currently work for Intuit. I've been here for just a little over 3.5 years. My day job, I'm an IT analyst. I work in the space where I help all of our employees get to work, make sure all of their tech works. I also delve a little bit into project management. And my other job, my gay job, which is the one that I'm really passionate about, is I am one of 3 global Pride network chairs for Intuit. I've been in this role, I want to say, for about 1.5 years, but my involvement with the Intuit Pride Network started when I started working for Intuit. I did a lot of volunteer work. Intuit places a huge focus on giving back to the community, so it started off as volunteering, and I gradually kind of grew into the role by becoming an events coordinator, by becoming the SF Bay Area site chair, and then recently becoming one of the global chairs. So in this role, we're working on exactly what we're talking about in this call. We are working on trying to get folks engaged, especially at a global level. And in regards to the work that I do with Out and Equal, Intuit has been a long-standing partner and sponsor for many Out and Equal summits. We've also sponsored Executive Forum. So I've been working with Out and Equal for the past couple of years, just getting more experience in the diversity and inclusion realm. And I'm also on their People of Color Advisory Board as well.
Great, thanks, Abigail. Reese, how about you?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. My name is Reese McKinnon, and I'm a principal in Mercer's Wealth business, so based in Melbourne in Australia. My day job, as it were, is to help Mercer's clients grow their business and look after their people by connecting them with Mercer's insights and thought leadership and products in the health, wealth, and career space. I'm also the global chair of Mercer's LGBT and Allies resource group, and on our Women at Mercer steering committee as well. So I've been in the global chair role for around 18 months now, and prior to that, the leader here in Australia and New Zealand. And much like Abigail, I've been in that role for about 18 months. We are very much working on the engagement of all our colleagues, particularly focused on ally engagement. And of course, millennial engagement is a large part of that, given they represent such a big chunk of our workforce. Thanks, Kevin.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Reese. So we heard some research about millennials and some definitions about millennials at the beginning of the call. But what I wanted to do before we really dig into sort of your experiences, each of you, is just ask you to share with us, when you hear the term millennial applied to you as a label or a description, what does that mean to you? How do you identify as a millennial? And Abigail, why don't we start with you again?
I actually, oddly enough, don't mind being called a millennial. It's funny, earlier in the slides when Ben referred to like variation in the generation, I'm definitely on the beginning of that, I would say. I was born in '84, so I grew up analog. You know, in elementary school, I had to look up, when I would write a report, I would have to use an encyclopedia to look up information. I learned the Dewey Decimal System. So I kind of grew up with analog, but then also was around to see the internet kind of be born. I was around when AOL became a thing, and then post-AOL, when the internet just really kind of blew up, and everybody all of a sudden had their own websites. We saw social media start up with like Friendster, MySpace, things like that. So I don't, and even though in a lot of ways millennial is kind of negative because of stereotypes that we hear from other generations, I see it as positive. Like I kind of take it and own it, and it's something that I'm really proud of.
Great, thanks, Abigail. Reese, what about you? When you hear millennial used to describe you, how do you identify as a millennial? In what ways does the description of millennial apply to you, or maybe not apply to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually with Abigail on this one. I was born in 1987. So that makes me 29 right now. I do identify as a millennial, and if someone was to use that word to describe me, I would be similarly comfortable with that. But then having said that, you know, I identify as a millennial, I identify as gay, I identify as male. So it's just another part or aspect of me as a person. So as I think about how people describe millennials as, you know, generally tech savvy, used to rapidly changing world and often more adaptable, have different values to their older counterparts, you know, for instance, valuing healthy work-life balance, etc. All of those things sit comfortably with me, so I am quite happy to be referred to as a millennial.
Got it. All right. Thanks for that. Well, it's worth noting, just as a confession, I actually am not a millennial according to most of the scales. I'd like to describe myself as millennial adjacent. I was born in '77, so for those of you who are doing math quickly, that means this year I'll be turning 40, a little bit after the summit. So, you know, I much in the same way that Abigail was describing that, you know, she sort of saw the shift into the digital information age. You know, I did as well, and so. I'm intrigued by this. Most of the scales put millennials starting around 1980 or a little bit after, and so I just barely missed that cutoff. But I'd like to think that I speak fluent millennial, and so I really appreciate you guys sharing your perspective here. So I wanted to turn the conversation a little bit to employee resource groups. You know, there's been a lot of discussion lately, particularly in some of the media around decisions that some organizations have made regarding employee resource groups. That says that millennials are less interested in employee resource groups. Even at the beginning of the call, Ben was sharing with us some research saying that, you know, there's a little bit less engagement in some cases, and yet we see a large portion of participants at Out and Equal, for instance, at the Workplace Summit, are millennial. In my own personal experience with the clients that I work with through Jennifer Brown Consulting, we see quite a few millennials, not only in you know, member roles within employee resource groups, but in leadership roles also. And so I wanted to ask both Abigail and Reese, when, you know, you hear this perspective of millennials aren't interested in employee resource groups because they don't want to be labeled or they don't feel like they belong in just one description or one box, how does that feel to you? So Abigail, what was it that prompted you as a millennial to start getting involved in your employee resource group, not even a leadership role, but just to start showing up?
What prompted that was, for me personally, so I live in the Bay Area. I lived in San Francisco for several years, and now I currently live in Oakland. What triggered it for me was moving from San Francisco to Oakland, because Oakland is known to have such a strong community presence. You have people that protest for a range of things, right? So Oakland is a very politically active area, and I found that the more that I got involved with my community and my neighborhood in Oakland, the more I kind of thought, hey, like if I'm doing this, like volunteering outside of work, like I should also be able to do this like at work. Like let's check out, what's going on with the Pride Network at Intuit. Like how can I be more involved? So in a lot of ways for me, it started off by where I was living. I live in an area where everybody really, really cares about their community, and they fight for everything that they believed in, and that was the kind of catalyst for me to get more involved with the Pride ERG and Intuit.
So a follow-up question there. When you hear people saying that millennials don't want to be associated with a particular label, how do you react to that? What was it that made you think that this ERG involvement is something I want to do in spite of what many would say is that reluctance to be tied down to one aspect of your identity?
I want to say it's interesting, right? Because in San Francisco, like everybody knows the Bay Area is an inclusive place, right? Like we have that kind of identity here as a location. I want to say, for me, it was about being known and being out and being like, being an out lesbian at work is a very political statement. It takes a lot of courage and bravery to say, hey, like, I'm a person, I'm here, I'm gay, but I'm still a very great resource that can help you fix your computer, and it's one of those things where if I can be out at work and bring myself, like my true authentic self, and just be who I am, hopefully that will help influence other people to have that same bravery and courage to be out as well. That's where I can stand on that aspect. So it's one of those things where it's like the more people that we have that are out, the more we can help drive the change that we want to see, like especially in other places, like let's say in the South, right, where if we have somebody, we have, Intuit has an office in Plano, and the example I'll use is, we had a chair in Plano that was struggling to like really get folks engaged, and, he was an ally, he was a veteran, and he wanted to show his support for us, but in a lot of ways, like in where he was living, like you can't really be out. In a lot of ways, he was even scared to show that he was an ally. So for me, it was like, if I can be out, be myself, show everybody that, hey, I can be a lesbian and be very comfortable in my skin. Hopefully that'll help people to do the same.
Great, and it sounds like I hear you saying that being out is it's showcasing one aspect of your personality, of your identity, but that there's more than just being out to you at work.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Reese, well, what about you, Reese? When you hear people say that millennials aren't interested in employee resource groups because they don't want to be so visibly tied down to one particular label or one aspect of their identity, how do you react to that?
Yeah, so we have, certainly our experience at Mercer has seen people in the millennial cohort opt in and opt out of ERG activity at different times. For me personally, I know I opt in because I think it's important to be visible, as Abigail referenced, to take on that role modeling responsibility and be the person that perhaps one of us needed when we were younger, and use the voice that we have for those who can't. I will say that I have seen the millennial cohort start to be a voice in resource groups, certainly at Mercer and our other operating companies, to shape the resource group activity, and certainly to start to take on leadership responsibilities. So, millennials, as a general statement, want to see their companies invested in the social causes that they identify with, LGBTI equality being one of them. We want our companies to do well and to do good. So I've seen millennials, through opting in and participating in resource groups, cause a shift, in my observation, from employee resource groups into maturing business resource groups. So where those resource groups start to target specific talent and business needs, support training development and training programs within the business. So that shift has been visible to me, and I think that's down to millennials starting to opt in where they can see that it will help them in their career, where they can see that it will, but where they're able to make a contribution.
And do you feel that in this role that you've had, that you've been in any way sort of limited or boxed into that LGBT identity, or is that more balanced with other aspects of your identity at work as well?
No, I feel it's been quite balanced. I certainly have been given opportunities through my participation in the resource group that I perhaps wouldn't have received otherwise. So I actually think rather than limiting my career and the options that I have as a professional, I think it's increased those options and the visibility that I have taken on, and that leadership role has allowed me to kind of grow my business as usual aspect and really enhance the skills perhaps in an accelerated way that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do so otherwise.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Well, that actually segues nicely into the next topic that I wanted to address with each of you. And rather than going back and forth, Reese, I'm going to keep you on the hot seat here. What I wanted to talk about was the experience of being in these leadership roles. And so you each shared separately that you started volunteering for, in some cases, similar reasons, but that over time you sort of moved up the ranks through the employee resource group. So you took on additional responsibilities, and ultimately that led to you being in a senior global leadership role, the chief gay officer or the chief lesbian officer, as we used to say at the bank. So I wanted to ask Reese, can you tell us a little bit more about the experience that you've had, and as you have stepped up and taken on additional responsibilities, what impact that's had on your visibility, your reputation, your brand, if you will, internally at Mercer?
Yes, certainly. So I actually put my hand up to be on a Diversity and Inclusion Council here in the Pacific region. So Pacific region is Mercer speak for Australia and New Zealand. So when the opportunity came to be on the Diversity and Inclusion Council, I put my hand up for that. As a D&I council, we then carried out various activities to test the appetite for an LGBT resource group and established one locally that fit into an already existing global structure at Mercer. So I had the fun task of attending a lot of late night calls and connecting with other chapters around the world, and through that interaction was able to assist in the establishment of a really self-sustaining resource group here in Australia and New Zealand. And then after a couple of years, I was lucky enough to take on the leadership of that really excellent group of chapter leaders. So as that, I hate the word, but as that journey progressed, it really helped me and actually tied in nicely to my own professional development. So in that time, I've moved from being an associate at Mercer into a senior associate and now onto a principal role. And I think as I have expanded my leadership and visibility, certainly in Australia and New Zealand, that helped me to be more comfortable interacting with very senior people, but also understanding and I guess relating to many different individuals around the company about what it is that they're wanting their resource group to do and how it's meant to represent them or how they'd like to represent them. And really taking the time to understand those perspectives has helped me to, I guess, corral people in the same direction, to move people as a group towards the strategic direction of the resource group, so channeling and harnessing that energy. So those experiences, I think, have really added to my own professional development and helped me to interact with the business in a more broad sense.
Great, thanks for that. Abigail, what about you? As you've stepped up and taken on additional responsibilities, what have you seen in terms of your visibility, your development, your brand internally at Intuit?
I want to say it follows kind of a very similar arc as Reese. The nature of my day job, I interact with people all over our company. And as I grew into this global role, so, I'm transitioning into more project management roles. And a lot of my project management experience has been pretty isolated to IT, right? But since more and more of my coworkers that I interact with, as we're putting on events, as we're marketing, panels that we're having at work, or talking about ways that we can do like cross-functional events with other ERGs, I find that I'm getting more and more projects that are related to diversity and inclusion, which is what I'm really, really passionate about. So it's really cool to be able to, my boss refers to this as context switching, where like I've been able to practice my ability to apply skill sets in PM, even though a bulk of my work has been IT, I can apply a lot of those concepts into D&I work. For example, one of the more recent projects that I just started working on is change management at Intuit, and how we're trying to help all of our employees adapt to rapid change better. So it involves increased communications, things like that, transparency, and all that. So it's really awesome because like my direct, our executive sponsor for the Pride Network is Atticus Tyson, but I also report to him up the chain because he's our CIO. So it's really cool to have him as a leader in the IT realm, but also to have him as a mentor and a leader in the D&I space, because he's very, very passionate about the LGBTQ community. He does everything he can to support a lot of the initiatives that the global chairs and our broader team want to implement. So it's cool because I'm able to find ways to mix my two worlds together. We work on a lot of really, really awesome tech in my day job, and I get to expand that into helping things be more streamlined and helping everybody that's in our Pride Network collaborate better because of the tech that we've been able to implement. So in terms of visibility, it's been great. I've been able to do really, really awesome work with Out and Equal because of it, because of our longstanding relationship and being able to go to Summit, learn best practices from other folks that have been successful in this space as well. So I've met tons and tons of people who really love working in this space and who love wanting to drive the change that we want to see. So for me, it's all the more motivation I need to keep like doing what I'm doing. Like I know from doing all of this work that I'm in the right space.
That's great, and especially when your day job and your LGBT work can really be in alignment there. That's the best of both worlds, isn't it? Well,
yeah, it's really cool.
I have a couple more questions, but I want to throw out a plug to the audience. We definitely want to make sure that we are going to be able to answer your questions, so make sure you're adding those questions in the chat functionality, please. And also, we really want to be sure that we are addressing some specific action-oriented things. So what can you do differently? If you participate in a training activity or a webinar or development program and you don't do anything differently as a result, I'm not sure it's the best use of your time. So with that, I have two more questions I wanted to ask. And the first is, when you think about your experience as a millennial leader of an ERG, what can ERGs do to add more value for their millennial members? So, very selfishly for members, what can our ERGs do to add more value to those millennial members? Abigail, why don't we stick with you? What are your thoughts?
Give me a second to think about a good answer on that one. I For me, it's about, so at Intuit, we're in a state right now where we're preparing for next fiscal year, so we're ramped up and pretty busy. For us, for me, for our Pride group, especially for millennials, my key thing is what can I do to help make collaboration easier for millennials? I know for us, because we're so used to having apps and things that are really UI friendly. A lot of the projects that I'm working on to make everybody more engaged is to make ease of use for everybody to collaborate, or to make it easier for everybody to collaborate together. So we have Slack that we use to open up conversation. Everybody that's in our Pride network is welcome to join our Slack channel. We've got a Jive platform where everybody, no matter where you are virtually, if anybody that works for Intuit doesn't have a specific Pride ERG at their location, they can certainly interact over the web through our Jive website, where we have blog posts. Each of our sites that does have a space can post events that are happening on site. So a lot of what I'm focused on is what makes it easy for people to feel engaged.
Okay. Reese, what about you? When you think about what ERGs can do to add more value to their millennial members, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So just as an observation, generationally there is a difference in what people expect from their employer, and by extension of that, their resource groups. So our future of work research shows that millennial individuals expect their employer to make work for their individual circumstances. So in response to this emerging need, companies really need to have a greater focus on personalization and flexibility. So what does that mean for us as an employee resource group? Well, we've used that future of work research to interpret, and certainly our own experience tells us that because millennials will opt into ERG activity when they're comfortable doing so, we find they look to do that when they can see that it will firstly help to advance their own career. Generally when they can see a direct connection between their effort and the hours or the effort they're putting in, and the connection between that and the activity and the impact that the resource group is having, and especially where they can see that the company is acting in a way that is authentic. So when their own internal experience and the firm's external messaging is consistent, and colleagues feel that their company is really walking the walk as well as talking the talk. So if a resource group is focusing on that small handful of things, then I think that they will be delivering more value to their millennial employees, their millennial colleagues. Just in reference to Abigail's earlier comment about the use of tech, etc., we have a really healthy online community at Mercer that helps us to connect LGBT people from different regions around the world. And certainly we found that people will share their personal stories, comment, interact, provide support to other colleagues through that facility. So I feel like our use of technology in that space has really particularly served us well as it relates to the millennial cohort. So yeah, I think it's a combination of a few things, but really understanding how the work that the BRG or ERG does relates to the specific needs that a millennial is looking to have met, and then providing the facility to have them interact in a way that they're comfortable with, which tends to be more through an online interface.
Why don't we turn that around and say, as an ERG leader, what is it that you need from millennials? So what can millennials do to be more supportive and engaged with their employee resource group? And Reese, we can stick with you if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. I might take a second just to think about that one, actually. So I think that it's important for people to communicate with us what it is that the need that they're having, wanting to have met by participating in the RG. I mean, we can make broad sweeping statements about what we understand millennials' needs to be, but at the end of the day, everyone brings a unique set of circumstances to that. So I would warn against those generalizations that I myself have just been making. So don't be afraid to raise in conversation, in feedback where it's asked or even not asked, the types of activities that you would like to see as an individual that identifies as a millennial. Also, don't be afraid to, through your participation or not, provide that feedback with your feet as well. I mean, I know at Mercer we have experienced that the millennial group tend to opt into activities when they're off-site rather than on-site. When it's something that relates to networking, for instance, rather than just another session on unconscious bias. So those kinds of things we've taken as intrinsic feedback and started to shape our program of work around that. What else would I ask of millennials? Interact, understand, seek to understand other people's experiences, particularly those of different generations. So at Mercer, we try and think of diversity as being greater than age, race, gender, sexual orientation, but also inclusive of communication style and different industries, lines of business, socioeconomic background, etc. So please do go out there and seek to understand different perspectives, and also recognize that those different perspectives bring value in all sorts of different ways. So so do be open to that, I would say.
Okay, great. Abigail, what about you? What is it that you need millennials to do to better support your ERG?
I think Reese nailed it, especially with that last comment about just being open, the seeking to understand. That's something that I challenge myself to do every day. What's important for me as an ERG leader is feedback. I want to have that open and honest transparency and feedback with everybody that's in our Pride network, and having just open lines of communication, and just not being afraid to talk to us, not being afraid to reach out to us with any ideas or anything to make the experience better for everybody. I think in a lot of ways, I know for us, we're working through trying to make it easier for folks to join the Pride network. We've received that direct feedback from folks that are hey, I work at the Intuit San Diego site, and do we even have a Pride leader here? What can I do to help? So those types of things, seeking our help, is one of the most important things to me, because then I know, hey, I need to fill a need for you as your leader. I know that I need to help you do this, to help find somebody to help plan events for you at that site specifically. But yeah, more importantly, I really, really agree with the kind of stepping outside of your comfort zone. And I've challenged myself recently to do that more, and speaking with a lot of the older folks at Intuit. Intuit's got a lot of people that have been part of this company for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, which speaks to how Intuit values its employees, and there's a lot that I can learn from folks that are very seasoned in these roles. So that's something that I would love to see a lot of our younger folks do, just learning from people that have been here for years and years. Because there's just a lot of insight and untapped knowledge that we can learn from each other, I guess. But yeah, just a lot of it is just stepping outside of our comfort zones and being willing to have those hard conversations within the D&I space, and also just from a business standpoint. I talk to engineers all the time about how we can improve our cross-functional relationships, and when I can, I throw in the diversity and inclusion aspects in there too.
Great. Thanks, Abigail, for sharing. Well, I am going to hand the call back over so we can actually hear some of your questions. Before I do, I just want to give a quick shout-out of thanks to Abigail for joining, and to Reese for joining. Especially Reese, the sun is not even up in Australia right now, so thank you so much for joining at this ridiculous hour of the morning. But Isabel, why don't we turn it back over to you and hear what questions the audience has.
Thank you all so much. We have some excellent questions. I'm going to start with the elevator pitch question. So an ERG leader wrote in and asked, what's the ideal elevator pitch for attracting more millennials to a Pride ERG? How can we frame our employee resource group to get millennials really excited to want to learn more? So I would turn it over to you and say, imagine that I'm a new coworker and trying to get me involved in the ERG. What's your elevator pitch for getting me to join a meeting? And I'll address that to all three of you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I'm thinking about.
Getting good at putting them on the spot, aren't we?
Yeah, I want to say, for me, okay. So let's say first day at work, you're on my team. Hey, I'm Abigail. I'm training you, etc. I don't know. I think first it's just my elevator pitch is just trying to have a conversation and just trying to get to know you. What are your interests? What, hey, you work for Intuit, cool, but what are you passionate about outside of here? And if one of those responses happens to be hey, well, I happen to be an ally, or what's your ally program like here, or whatever. That's actually something that we're working on right now, ally program within our Pride network. So a lot of it would just have to depend on what you're passionate about and finding that common ground for us to find an opportunity to work together. So if I take allies, for instance, my pitch would be hey, do you have an idea of how do you, what are your ideas about maybe doing a lunch and learn and having a panel of allies that want to do something, that want to help, the Pride ERG, what can we do? I would look for any opportunity to collaborate together, essentially. Not really a pitch per se, but just trying to find a way to find common ground and having something to bond over and then building from there.
It's really personalized, not necessarily a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. So another question came in from Joshua. Many of the panelists, you seem to have expanded your roles within your firms via leadership role by getting involved in the ERG, but in circumstances where an enhanced leadership role isn't available, what could drive inclusion? What programs and activities should we be bringing to our LGBT ERG members that would drive engagement? So for those
Sure, so I can jump in and answer that one if you like. So I would say that a leadership role within an ERG is just one of the many roles that are required to create a successful and self-sustaining resource group. So what can you do outside of, say, being the leader of the resource group? There are so many volunteers and activities that we need help with. Maybe it's because we as a leader might be based in a separate geography. That proximal advocacy is really powerful. So volunteer where possible, offer to help with things like communications, offer to help with things like policy reviews, etc. Outside of that, just be a champion within your own personal network and really help to highlight or amplify the messages of inclusion that the BRG is putting out. So if that means to you, talking to your immediate team members about the work that the BRG is doing and why it matters to you, then jump in and do that. If it means retweeting the tweets that your BRG or your company is sending out, then absolutely do that. So there are plenty of ways to engage and contribute to the success of the BRG without necessarily being in a leadership role per se.
Perfect. I see a couple of questions that came in before we began the panels. I am assuming these are for Ben, although I'll certainly welcome you to jump in if you have more information. But I thought there was a Generation Y that existed between Gen X and Millennial. Can you clarify that, Ben?
Yeah, so Millennials and Gen Y are the same thing. Millennial is just a more common term.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then someone else, Bernard, wrote in and asked, what term should we use instead of millennial when referring to the generation?
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially because Gen Y isn't really that widely known, so people often don't even know that they are Gen Yers. They more commonly hear millennials. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, as Abigail and Reese both mentioned, it's not that millennial is always a bad term, and using it, I think, people often know that they're being called upon and people know that they are millennials. It's really the context in which it's being used, just because it so often is coming in messages of like, millennials are ruining this, millennials have destroyed this. So I think just like making sure that the programming is positive and using millennial in a positive way I don't want to say not to use the term, because then getting into variations such as like young employees or young people is it's different, and so millennials still definitely on the table.
As long as you're just not saying millennials are ruining anything. Excellent. We're getting a number of questions about sort of regional differences. And so Javon wrote in and said, do you notice regional differences that perhaps maybe override, generational differences between Texas and California? Or Renee lives in the Netherlands and says, I noticed that most of our millennial allies are more interested in the sort of party and social aspect of the ERG. Do you see this regional differences in your own ERGs, or do you see more of a uniform experience there?
Differences for sure, especially like Intuit's a very global company, and it a lot of ways it just depends on where you're at. I know something for us that I'll say that we're struggling with is how to get more young people involved, because I don't know if it's something that's just because we're in the Bay Area, right? Like nobody really has to come out here per se. It's just kind of in the ether, where in a lot of ways you're gay unless proven otherwise, right? So a lot of people don't feel the need to come out or the need to say like, yes, like I'm the lesbian or gay man here. But in places like Tucson, which has like our Pride network in Tucson is very active. Very incredible. They work very closely with the Chamber of Commerce. They do a lot of cross-functional activity ERGs as well. So for us, it's just we're struggling through trying to get everybody on the same page. I do see regional differences depending on where you are for sure.
Reese, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like Intuit, we're a global company, and we see the geographical differences, in quite stark relief. So our United States, our Australia, New Zealand, the UK, they have a very different environment to, say, our Asian countries where we have offices and colleagues based. So we have challenges around having the ERG be as visible, as accepted, have successful activities run in those particular regions. So absolutely there are differences, and you need to just approach those, understanding the context in which those parts of our business are operating in, and be respectful of that, and just continue to push those messages of acceptance and inclusion, no matter where in the world those colleagues are located and what context they're in. So yeah, there are certainly differences.
Okay. And our final question, and this came in a few different times, so a number of people have asked this. What can you share in terms of programming? So for folks who are on the line who are ERG leaders or working on programming for their resource groups, what can you recommend in terms of what engages millennials the most? Is it social gatherings? Have you noticed that fundraisers maybe tend to draw more in, volunteering days? Is it social networking type events? What types of events have you had the most success engaging millennials with?
So I think I mentioned this before. We found within our own business that millennials are more likely to opt in when there are networking opportunities and events are billed as networking opportunities, and also when they're off-site, so when there's a removal from the office environment that is business as usual, so to speak. I also am extremely proud of the community work that the BRG does, both as a standalone group and also in partnership with our Mercer Cares resource group, which is our volunteering and community outreach resource group. So I found that a lot of people are very happy to get on board when we are running activities that benefit the broader community as well.
Yeah, I want to say the same for Intuit. We get the most engagement when we do cross-functional activities with other ERGs, where we all do community service together. Those have been the most successful for us.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. I want to be mindful of the time, and so thank you to Kevin, Abigail, and Reese. We have a number of questions that we didn't get to, and I will follow up with our panelists and hopefully get some more answers out to you in a blog form shortly. Before we conclude, I'd like to just remind you that our next town call is on Tuesday, September 26th, so a special day. It's a workplace summit. Know before you go. It'll be at noon Pacific. Please ask that you complete the brief survey at the end of the call. And before we go, I'd also like to make a plug one more time for the Workplace Summit. Each of our speakers will be presenting in some capacity at the summit. And so I highly encourage you to check out the schedule that's available online. And we hope to see everyone in Philadelphia. Thank you all so much.